everybody. Good to see you. Welcome to Lewisville. If we haven't met, my name is Matt. Glad to have you here. I'm not sure if, actually, before I jump in, I want to mention really quickly, tomorrow evening, 7 p.m., there's a prayer meeting here. And so it's just an open invite if anyone wants to come and be a part of it with us. 7 p.m., you just come in the main doors, and I'm not sure exactly which room it will be in, but we'll make sure we point you in the right direction, okay? It's always an open invite to our monthly prayer time. So I don't know if you've ever had a situation where you needed to go to court or stand in front of the judge. You don't need to put up your hand or anything. I'm not looking to center anybody out. But I haven't. I've never had to give testimony or kind of stand in that place. The closest I came was this. Years ago, on a Saturday morning, Hadley and myself, we went grocery shopping, and my youngest daughter, and got everything done, loaded back in the car, and we were leaving the parking lot of the grocery store, and it was a left-hand turn, and it was, it's in Oakville, and it's like 2 lanes coming this way, 2 lanes the other way, and a big middle section that different, depending, you can use for turning, left-hand turning lane. And for whatever reason, I was distracted, and I don't know, I just saw a big pickup truck coming, and as soon as he turned on his right signal that he was going to be turning into like the shopping plaza, for some reason I felt like, now's a good time for me to turn left without making sure where he was going 100%. Now, luckily he did go in, but what I didn't see is another car on the other side of him was zipping along. So I went out to turn left, and this car came, and we had a crash. Now, lucky I wasn't going too fast, and they were able to brake a little bit. And I don't know if you've ever been in an accident. Sometimes people get out of the cars in an accident, and they're all like pointing at each other like it was the other person's fault. I knew 100% it was my fault. Like, there was no doubt. So I got out, and I'm like, it's my fault. I'm sorry. Like, totally me. And the other driver got out, and you could tell, like, he was like ready to throw fists. Like, you could tell he was like mad. But, I quickly was like, I know it was me. It was my bad. I'm so sorry. And I think he looked past me and saw Hadley she was maybe 6 or 7 at the time, sitting in the back seat, and that kind of helped calm him down. Like, he's like, okay, this guy's got a kid. I'm going to relax a little bit. So we had our little discussion, and then we had to pull over, and the cops came, the whole deal. And the police officer is writing it all up, and he said, I'm going to have to charge you with, I believe he said failure to yield. I think that's what it was. And with it, there's this fine, and you're going to lose some demerit points from your insurance that's going to cost you in the coming years. And I was like, oh, man. But, it was totally my fault. And so he's just waiting, and he's doing all the paperwork, and hands me this ticket. And as we're about to leave, he says to me, you can just pay this outright. You can go home and pay it now and just get it done with. Or, your other option is to go to court. And he said, I would encourage you to kind of go there, because every time you go, if you plead your case, if you're kind of humble and you take ownership, generally speaking, you never know, but generally speaking, the judge will reduce the fine or at least limit some demerit points. And so he said, totally up to you. And so in my mind, I'm like, if I can save money and it might help my insurance, like, that's a win. So booked the thing in my calendar. I'm going to go to the court, and I was getting it all primed in my head as I was driving to my court appointment maybe a few months later. And kind of nervous about standing in front of the judge. Like, again, this is not a major case or anything, but I was like, okay, how do I do this? What kind of questions? I've never been in that situation before. And when I got there to the courthouse, they're calling out names, and they called my name, and I went, and I had to meet with the prosecutor beforehand. If you've ever done this, this is probably familiar to you. Had to meet with the prosecutor beforehand because they wanted to go over the charges and how it would go. So I go in this room, and this lawyer's there, and he's reading through the charges, and like, I'm just sitting there, he's not really saying anything, and I'm just still sitting there, and he's reading through it all. And then he asked me this question. He says, when you were turning left, was there a stoplight where you were turning left? And I said, no, it was just a stop sign, and then I was pulling out myself, and I made the mistake. And he said, okay. And then he turns around, and he pulls out this big book from another shelf behind him, and he's flipping pages, and he's reading, and I don't know what's happening. Obviously, I'm just kind of sitting there. And then all he says is he slams the book shut, and he says, get out of here. And I was like shocked. I'm like, what's, like, I can leave? He said, you're free to go. The officer wrote the charge wrong. Since there was no stoplight, you can go. And I skipped out of that place so happy. I was like, it was incredible. Then I started thinking, did that police officer give me the hint he was going to do it wrong? I don't think so. I think he actually wrote it wrong, and I just happened to get lucky. But I was so relieved I don't have to stand in front of the judge. I was feeling so nervous about it. And you think about that woman or man, even in our society, all over, even here in Moncton, the people who hold that role as a judge, think about the pressure and the weight of their role. Not just with traffic and infringements or whatever, but think about major things. They're putting themselves in this position of determining and implementing the law. Obviously, there's laws that guide their decisions, but think of that weight, that power. I would never want that responsibility. I want to be the guy who's get out of here, you're free. That sounds fun. I wouldn't want to be the other person. But when you step back, there's this interesting thing that in the passage we're going to look at today. We're looking at this whole section, the beginning section we're looking at today. Jesus gives clear instructions, do not judge. I've been thinking a lot about that leading into it because, yes, in a court judicial way, I would never want that responsibility. But on a human level, we all have the potential or the temptation to want to put ourselves in that position of judgment. It's almost natural human instinct to climb up on behind the big proverbial desk and get out the gavel and look down our nose and from our position to judge the actions or the sayings or the whatever people are doing. We kind of put ourselves, maybe you use the phrase, up on a high horse. Jesus clearly warns against that and teaches against it as he's unrolling this ethic of what it means to be followers of Jesus, these kingdom people. And so this morning we're going to look, the text begins on this idea of do not judge, and then there's 3 distinct sections we're going to cover today. So I invite you, grab your Bibles. Matthew chapter 7 is where we're beginning today. We're going to be at verse 1 to 14. You can use the QR code if you want, follow along. There's also some Bibles at the back, as we've been mentioning. If you don't have a Bible and you want to just slip out and grab one and follow along. If you don't even own a Bible, we want to make sure that at least you can leave here with one for home. But please follow along as we kind of track through these verses. It's a pretty important text, and there will be time for us to have a bit of a conversation around it as well. One other thing, you'll know that Adams and Stephen, representing our church, have been down in Guatemala, and so they've been sending pictures and I think doing important work, and then they sent me this one. And this was yesterday, I believe. They're on transit home now. I don't know where they are, but they have a number of flights to get home by tonight. And I woke up to this picture, and I believe yesterday they were supposed to hike up this volcano, and I was teasing them about it before they even flew out. I'm like, I hope it's real strenuous, and that's your fun day before you go to the airport. And then they sent me this, and I felt they kind of cheated. So. And it's surprising to me because Adams looks somewhat really relaxed, but Stephen looks nervous, and I would have bet any money it would be opposite. So I don't know. I can't wait to hear how this one unfolded. But they're doing really well, and if you're like, what is happening? We are beginning this relationship through Canadian Baptist Ministries with ministries in Guatemala as our church supporting and partnering in that way. And so they, on behalf of our church, have been down there this past week, and so looking forward to hearing the updates from them and over the coming years, how this relationship will shape and transform us as a church here. Okay, let's read this together. I'll pull out a few ideas and thoughts, but again, if you have ideas or questions or things that you want to raise up, we'll have some time to do that in a few minutes, okay? So I'll just say that at our first service, we had 2 people grab the mic and speak, well, not grab, but put out their hand for the mic, who had never spoken before. So I know there's some people who feel very comfortable, but if you've never shared, this may be your time, so be ready, okay? Here we go. Let's read this together. Matthew 7, beginning at verse 1. Do not judge, Jesus says, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is this plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Verse 7, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you, then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. 13, enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Okay, let's look at this first section then together, this idea of do not judge, and this idea of this log or plank being in someone's eye. So context is always important. What is happening? Why is Jesus saying it this way? So in the first century Jewish context, they were a community and a people that were closely and deeply knit together. This is just the way they were. And at the center of every community, there was a synagogue, and it was the place not only for faith, but also for community life, for spending time together, for socializing. And if there was any disputes within the community between people, they would bring their disputes to the leaders, the elders of the synagogue, and those folks would help be the judge then of how things should be resolved. And so this rhythm of like bringing complaints into community was well known. Now, if you put on top of that, there was this religious class, these Pharisees, who had this role of interpreting Old Testament scripture and helping people understand what it meant to apply them. And over time, what ended up happening is that the Pharisees and the religious elite began to model that the way you appear holy is all about your external appearance and your external actions. They were not so much concerned about the transformation or what was happening inside of you. It was all about external, what people could see. So it wasn't so much about prayer as an inward expression of a conversation to God. It was about hopefully people will see you praying and then think you're super holy. And so built into this, what emerged is this culture and this ethic of like calling people out. So everyone was watching for the failures of the other person. And it was really normal in this time that if you saw someone doing something wrong, you would call them to account, you would bring them in front of the community, you would call them out. You would look for the opportunity in some ways to be that judge, to climb up and say, oh, they have done this wrong, or they have broken this rule, or they have offended in this way. That's what was emerging and what was growing. And so when Jesus says to them, do not judge, there probably would be like, but wait a second, like that's who we are. That's how we operate. That's the normal standard. That's how we've always done things. What do you mean, do not judge? Because Jesus is more interested all the way through the Sermon on the Mount. He's always more interested in the internal, what's happening. Now, when he talks about judgment, sometimes we think about judging as being about right and wrong. That's not what this word that we translate judge means. It's not about right and wrong. It's about assuming the posture of the one who is more righteous or in control. It's taking that position of giving judgment on the other. So when Jesus is saying do not judge, he's not saying do not consider or discern what is right and what is wrong. He is saying do not intentionally put yourself in the position of evaluating the actions or the posture or the holiness of another. Don't put yourself in the place where you are acting like God, which had become the norm in the culture, to call out, to look, to ostracize. And what developed over time were these different kind of segments in culture. If you were wealthy and powerful and influential and you would put on this air of spiritual superiority, you were considered holy. And those people who maybe struggled or outwardly were kind of, their sin was more obvious, they would be considered outcasts. Or if they struggled economically, if they're poor, they would be considered less than. So there's almost a caste system that developed. And that's never the way God intended it to be, but that's the way people moved it and shaped it. And so Jesus, using exaggeration, is helping them understand like there's something deeply wrong here. Now, in ancient Jewish kind of teaching, if you were a rabbi, you would often use exaggeration as a way of driving home your point. It was the way to get everyone to kind of pay attention. And that's really what Jesus does here. He gives this analogy, this illustration of the speck. You're so concerned about the speck in someone else's eye that you don't even realize this log or this plank or like this 2x4 sticking out of your eye. You're so blinded by your own shortcomings that you don't even know you have them, and you take it upon yourself to judge the actions of other people. That's what he's speaking about. That's what he's calling them out on. So years ago when I was a kid, we were living in Niagara Falls at the time, and we had cut down this tree in our backyard, and my dad, the company that cut it down just cut it up into big, like, round chunks. And then my dad, one Saturday, was going around with a metal wedge and a sledgehammer, and he was using that to break it into, I guess, smaller chunks. And then from then he was using an axe to break it into firewood. And so I was just out there as a little kid, I think I was 5 or 6 maybe, helping my dad, probably getting in the way, to be honest, but feeling like I was helping my dad move chunks of wood around. And at one point, my dad was swinging the sledgehammer. I don't know if it was off the sledgehammer. I think it was off the wedge, but a little piece of the metal, shrapnel, went flying, and it stuck in my eye. And someone at the first service told me what the white part is called. Does anyone know? There's nurses. Sorry? Sclera, yes. Jenna, thank you. I forgot from first service. But yeah, it's stuck in the sclera, folks, in the white part. And immediately, when you get a piece of dust or something in your eye, it freaks you out right away. Well, I was freaking out, and it was bleeding a little bit. Not a lot, but it was this little sliver of metal wedged right into the white part. And thank goodness my dad didn't think he could take it out, but he knew we needed to get some help here. And so my eye was swelling up. It was watering little bits of blood. And so we went to the hospital, and they, without too much difficulty, were able to cut it and take it out, and no worse for wear. But when I was in that position, I could barely see. I was out of my mind, and it would have been a really bad time for me to try to view or get a read on something, or to discern something, or to really look at something closely, right? I couldn't see properly. And Jesus in this, he's saying, when you have not dealt with not just the sliver in your eye, but this log, this plank in your eye, you haven't even dealt with that, and you think that's a good place and a good time for judgment or evaluating the actions of someone else? You hypocrite. Who do you think you are? Now, I want you to notice that he does not say, in verse 5, at the end of verse 5, he says, you hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye. Notice this, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. He's not saying there's never an occasion to have honest conversations about things together. But the posture you enter that conversation and the work you have to do on your own is most important. Do the work. Where are you falling short? Where is there sin in your own life? What are your own blind spots? Deal with those things before you try to call out the actions of someone else, thinking you're better, more superior than the other. This is a reordering of authority, kind of. Taking this power for judgment away from the religious elite and the establishment, and saying, actually, everyone needs to deal with their own stuff first. Then and only then is the time for you to talk with a friend, a sister or brother about something that you think might be in the way there. Leon Morris, in his commentary, talks about this idea. He says, Jesus applies vivid imagery. The speck is a small piece of foreign matter, quite possibly a splinter or chaff. The plank, in this context, refers to the main beam of a house. The contrast is humorously exaggerated to bring home the point. That is, that the critic is more seriously flawed than the person he presumes to correct. The call to first take the plank out of your own eye is a call to self-examination and humility before presuming to correct another. And so Jesus is reshaping this idea from a time and culture where they would always be on the lookout for everything that everyone else was doing wrong as a way of boosting up their own sense of worth and value and pride. He's saying that is not the way. That's not the ethic of the kingdom. First, you need to deal with your own blind spots, your own shortcomings, your own sin. Then and only then can you have a conversation. If you will, it echoes back. Remember at the beginning, if you have been with us, at the very beginning of the series, we were walking through the Beatitudes. It's in Matthew chapter 5, and there's a Beatitude that says, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. And we talked about that when you're in this place of receiving mercy, when you recognize the goodness, the mercy, the grace, the forgiveness of God, because you have a right evaluation of your own standing, then you are more apt to extend mercy and grace and forgiveness because you have a right understanding of your own shortcomings. The problem with judgment, the way it could be used, is you fail to look at your own stuff and think that everybody else's stuff is wrong. And Jesus is calling this out. He's like, when you have dealt with your own stuff, the log, the beam, when you've done with that properly, then you're able to have an honest conversation. Sorry, this is really giving me problems here. Is it okay still? If it's falling off. Let me just keep going here. Just ignore me here for a second. The interesting thing about that whole, the merciful thing is that when we have experienced, I already said this, but when we've experienced the grace of God, like forgiven people know how to forgive. Like if you've never experienced forgiveness or never really wrestled it down, then you probably aren't as prone to extend forgiveness to others. But when you're in the place where someone has been extravagantly gracious to you, incredibly forgiving and understanding, if you were to turn around and not extend that, then what a hypocrite you are. But when you're in this place of like recognizing in a real way, with real introspection, real self-reflection, then it's a whole different thing. And so Jesus is saying that's the ethic of the kingdom. That's what it means. If you've been extended mercy, then you need to do that as well. Interesting thing, if you notice, in verse 6, he's talking about all this thing, do not judge, right? And we just talked about that. But then in verse 6, he talks about do not give dogs what is sacred, do not throw your pearls to pigs, to swine. Well, that feels like kind of judgy, doesn't it? Aren't we trying to decide then what to do with which situation? So I just want to quickly talk about this. So Jesus, again, draws always on images and situations that would have been familiar. So dogs and pigs. So again, it doesn't necessarily translate for us. So dogs in this culture, they're not like fur babies or whatever people call their dogs, right? Like, and I'm guilty. Like we have 2 dogs and we treat them not always like dogs, like we're too soft on them in many ways. In this time and culture, dogs were like wild, could be very vicious, wandering the streets, digging in the garbage, carrying disease. They were not pets. They were not to be like cuddled and held onto. They would be considered like dirty and unclean. Pigs even more so. Jewish ancient law would consider a pig as like the worst animal. You would be considered unclean if you touched a pig or came into contact. You wouldn't eat any pork products of any kind. And then number 2 on that is that the Roman Empire that was oppressing them, they would raise pigs and eat them. And so not only were they considered unclean, but also those terrible Gentiles who are oppressing us, they eat these things. They were bad on a whole bunch of different levels. So Jesus is using these 2 images, these animals that they would have been familiar with about like, well, they're vicious and dirty and unclean and we don't want anything to do with them. And he's like, well, you don't toss things that are sacred to them. You don't give your pearls to the pigs. Pearls is this allusion back to Old Testament wisdom and these proverbs that would have guided the understanding of the people. You don't just willy-nilly toss this out there. It makes no sense. Well, wait a second. Are we then judging people if we're saying we're not going to extend it here? What's happening? What Jesus is helping his followers, his listeners in this moment understand is that there are times where your heart is in the right spot, you want to have honest conversations, you've done self-reflection, and you want to extend conversation and openness with another, and they are just not in a place to receive it or to hear it. They're actively rejecting the things that define who you are as a follower of Jesus. So there's a difference between like judgmental, looking down my nose at people, and proper, prayerful discernment on a situation that's happening. And so Jesus is saying you don't take the valuable treasures of the kingdom and just throw them out there. You have to be careful sometimes. You have to evaluate sometimes when you have those conversations, because not everyone's surprised. Not everyone wants you to tell them what you think, or that there might be some issues that you think you need to talk through or resolve. Shocker, eh? But when people are in a place and all of us are doing our best to invite the transformation and change of Jesus, and we've experienced the mercy and forgiveness of Jesus, and a friend, a brother, sister comes to us and say, again, not with a log in their eye, but humbly say, I think there's something, can we talk about this? Then I want to hear that. I want to receive it properly, even if it's difficult, because that's a marker. Yes, God can convict us of ways we go wrong, but God also uses community as a way of encouraging and strengthening and helping us go forward. We're just not really good at that side, are we? We don't want to talk about that too much. Stott says this. He says, what is to be avoided is not loving discernment. This isn't about not recognizing there's times to have these kinds of conversations. There are. But what is to be avoided is not loving discernment, but critical, condemning, self-righteous spirit. That's what Jesus is calling out. Yet the parallel danger is the lack of discernment that fails to recognize the obstinacy of some hearts. There's a point at which it is proper to recognize a deliberate rejection. Watch this. There's a point at which to recognize, where it's proper to recognize a deliberate rejection of the gospel and to shake the dust off your feet. Jesus says that. If people aren't willing to listen, you shake the dust off your feet and you move on. There's other biblical teaching about how to have these honest conversations, about when to exercise judgment and discernment, of when to talk with people, how to talk with people. But what Jesus is calling out here in this beginning part is this posture of superiority, of like considering yourself to be a spiritual giant and missing the ways in your own life that you're falling short. Again, people have been shocked by this. Wait, don't judge? How are we supposed to do this? And then he continues on. He continues on with this idea of asking and seeking and knocking. Again, not a foreign idea to the listeners. For us, we might be like, well, what is that speaking to? How does that make sense? So first, can I just note that when he's talking about asking and seeking and knocking, there's almost this built-in progression of urgency and even intimacy that comes. So just think about it this way. If you're asking, like think of a child who's asking a parent for something. If you're asking, it's somewhat passive, like you're using your voice, but you're sharing what you want, you're asking, but then you're kind of leaving it out. If you're seeking, it's taking it a little bit more forward. There's a sense of initiative that you're taking. I'm seeking, I'm moving in this direction. And then if you think of knocking, it's even more of an action. I'm going to do something physically about it. And these ideas of asking and seeking and knocking, again, are not unfamiliar to the listeners here, strange maybe for us. In their own rhythm of worship, the ancient Jewish people had this notion of asking and seeking the Lord. There are a number of different passages in the Old Testament that talks about asking and seeking. Let me just bring up a couple here. Jeremiah 29 says, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." So when it comes to approaching God, there's this familiarity with seeking after God. In 2 Chronicles, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, which again is really cool because it's already foreshadowing this posture that Jesus says has to be a part of dealing with each other and how you approach God. Humble yourself and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. And then the book of Psalms, which is like the ancient Jewish worship songbook, if you will, there are a number of different places where they would use these certain psalms, as progressions. As they were approaching the temple, they would sing these things together as a part of their worship. It's almost like a declaration that we're coming to worship. And in that, there's this idea of knocking. It's like this liturgical sense of like, God, we are coming to your place and we want you to hear us. So let me give you there's a couple here. There's many more, but let me give you a couple here. Lift up your heads, you gates, be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. They would sing this as they're approaching the gates, the temple itself, coming to worship. Psalm 119 is another song of ascent, of approach. Open for me the gates of the righteous, and I will enter and give thanks to the Lord. This is the gate of the Lord through which the righteous may enter. So when you're talking about like this proverbial knocking, this signaling that we're coming, it's not unfamiliar to ask and then to seek and then to knock. And this whole thing is about the posture by which we enter and come into the presence of God with our prayers. Jesus is saying, you need to do this. This is okay. This is the posture you should have. Now, again, what's curious for the people is for all those who are on kind of that lower system, maybe the poor or the despised, those who are not considered religiously elite or having status, they would have had this understanding that we can't approach God. Who are we that we can come before God, and why would God ever listen to us? Probably not too different from maybe some folks here, or certainly people in our time and culture and city, where they may feel like the view of the culture on them is that they're less than. So why would God care about them? Who are we to bring our thoughts? Who are we to ask or to seek or, man, heaven forbid, knock, to pursue with intention? But Jesus is reframing this whole thing. He's encouraging them, like, you are to bring your requests. You are to come before God. You are to make your thoughts and requests known. And then notice the relational angle, because he says this. Verse 11, if you have it still open. If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more, note this, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? Look at that relational setup, right? God is not this distant, foreign, inaccessible being. Jesus is saying and framing it, even in the Lord's Prayer, which he has presented earlier in this text, to approach your Father, there's this relational dynamic that all of us, daughters and sons, can approach with confidence. It doesn't mean you're going to get everything you ask for. It doesn't mean you're in line with that. But to ask and to seek and to knock is a posture and the ethic of the kingdom, this progressive moving forward of relational connection with your Heavenly Father, that we're to approach with confidence and trust. Frederick Bruner writes this: Jesus is not offering a magic formula for getting our own desires met. Prayer isn't just about getting everything you want. It's not this divine vending machine, but inviting the kind of childlike trust that believes in the Father's goodness, especially when the answers do not come as we expect. If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, from verse 11, Jesus appeals to our parental instincts to reinforce our trust in God as Father. And one of these marks of maturity in faith and maturity in Jesus is knowing that we can ask and seek and knock, and that even if we don't see resolution to our prayers, or even if the resolution is not in the direction we had been hoping or praying for, or even if we never even see where it goes in our lifetime, or that we never get to witness where it all goes, that even through all those things, we have this deep trust in the goodness and love that our Father is doing the right thing. He's leading it in the right way. He is moving forward, which is, again, really hard on a human level, because we automatically bring into our prayers a sense of like, well, we kind of have it right, don't we? Like, we're kind of seeing the situation right. But this marker of being transformed by Jesus is recognizing I can be honest about my position, and God wants to hear that. But I also have to learn to grow in trust and confidence that the way this all goes may not be the way I think, because there's something bigger happening which we just can't fully understand or see. But Jesus is encouraging them, approach your Father, share what you want. And then the last section, really quickly here, he talks about the narrow path, the narrow gate, the wide path, the wide gate, from verse 13 and 14. Again, in that time and place, cities would have wide open gates during the daytime. People can come and go, flow in and out from their cities, from their villages, but there would certainly be times in the evening when they would close it all down, and they would probably tip to a smaller gate to limit the flow of traffic for safety and protection. And Jesus is drawing on this idea. He's helping them understand here that, hey, you know what? This wide path, this wide gate, isn't it awesome? You can there's no guardrails. You can do whatever you want. You can freestyle out here. You can pick your own way. You can choose your own path. You can do whatever feels right for you. That is an option for you. There is an option here where you can do it, and most people, surprise, pick that. Because from the very beginning of our human nature created being, the story of creation tells us that we've always been rebelling because we want to choose what's right and wrong for ourselves. And who dares to tell us that there should be some guardrails on this, or there's a standard by which we should live? So Jesus tells them, enter through the narrow gate. If you want to follow the way of Jesus, he's pointing you to the narrow gate. Then he says, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. Destruction here means, has the connotation of an internal consequence, an eternal separation. And many enter through it, he says. It's the wide open path. Most people will choose this. Then 14, though, he says, but small is the gate and narrow is the road. There are some defined parameters on what it means to align yourself with the way of Jesus. It's not an anything goes. There is an ethic, and Jesus is laying it out for us. There's an ethic to following Jesus. But then, ironically, look what it says. It leads to life. One leads to destruction. The one that seems easier and more freewheeling leads to destruction. The one that feels from the outside as more restrictive and confining, ultimately leads to what you're looking for, to true life, and only a few find it. Okay, I'm going to hold off there. There's so much here. I'm just going to leave it there for now. So I'm going to give you 90 seconds, really, really quick. Chat about this. Is there something around the judging part or the ask, seek, knock, or the narrow gates that you'd like to mention? And then I'll have a few thoughts to wrap up, okay? Have a chat, grab a coffee. I'll call you back. Go ahead. Okay, I know that was really, really quick. But I'd love to have a few folks jump in on the conversation if there's something that is piquing your curiosity or something you want to bring up or mention. Don't be shy. Okay, Stephanie, if there's anyone over here, just you can be ready. It's coming.
Hello.
Hi.
So one thing that I never noticed before, and I was enjoying in this, is it's talking about judgment and having like really tough conversations with people and doing it humbly, but then also in that same passage to seek God, right? And I think that sometimes when, I think I want to correct others, it's often in my own strength and not so much focused on, okay, like you can, but also seek God for his restoration and his work in this and seek for his kingdom, right? And I guess I just never put that together, and I was really enjoying that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good. I think sometimes when the tendency might be to rush into a conversation where we want to call out the behavior of others, and that is, I would say, is not a good pattern to follow. But if we seek God in it first, maybe even ask the question: Is this a conversation I should be having with another person? Is that mine to have? I think if we start there and deal with our own stuff prior to. Doesn't mean it's going to go well, though, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that people want to receive it. But that's part of, I think, also discerning what does it look like to bring this up in conversation. And you'll know right away if someone's ready to listen and trust. But it's one of those things that if you have the right kinds of friendships and you can do that, not in a calling out way, but in a sharpening each other kind of way, there's something really powerful that can happen relationally that way. But it requires a lot of trust to be able to move in those directions because it has been abused, definitely been abused by people in leadership positions, calling people out in, I would say, improper ways, and it's really can be hurtful. But in the right way, as Jesus describes, it can be something that shapes our discipleship. Yeah. Someone else want to jump in? Okay. Let's keep rolling here. So I used to love these books in school. I don't know if anyone read these. These are Choose Your Own Adventure books. And I know they still have them now, obviously more updated covers and titles and things, but I feel like this is what they used to look like when I read them. And this is how I think my mom wanted me to get into reading because you kind of had some control over it. You got to pick your own path. And if you don't know how it works, you would read the chapter, and at the end of every chapter, there'd be a choice. Turn to page 26 if you think your character should do this, or 37 if you want to do this. And as you're reading the story, you get to shape where it all goes, which I always thought was fun. And if you make the wrong choice, all of a sudden you may read, oh, my character just totally got killed or something, got eliminated. So sometimes you could kind of cheat. You could kind of look ahead. Do I want to go to there or don't want? And you could, anyways, make up your own story. I always found them kind of fun. Kind of interesting to just kind of make it up as you go. And I thought about that when I was thinking about this idea of Jesus presenting these two paths, right? The wide path, the wide gate that ultimately leads to destruction, and then Jesus saying, choose the narrow path that ultimately leads to life. And it feels almost counterintuitive. But I want to do all this for myself, but you're saying this, but this actually leads to life. How does that work? I think often what we try to do is we try to follow both paths, right? We try to be on the wide path for certain parts of our life to enjoy certain things, or then we get narrow path because, oh man, like we're on our drive to church, we better now just talk about that. Or I remember friends in university, especially when I was getting serious with Jesus and they knew about this, like it was becoming a very real thing for me. I remember they're like, why would you follow Jesus? You miss out on all the good stuff. And we'd have really interesting conversations because the way they evaluated the good stuff for me, in terms of their perspective, their worldview, to me, I'm like, actually, it's not the good stuff. As I experience this narrow path, which to you may feel restrictive, What I'm experiencing is complete transformation and change that's helping me experience life in a whole new way. So you view it as restrictive. I view it as life-giving. And that's still one of the things we wrestle with, right? Our culture, our time, and especially in this age where how dare you talk to me about maybe doing something wrong. We all want to police ourselves. We're our own judge. We're our own boss. But Jesus says there's something about submitting ourselves to something outside of ourselves and also opening ourselves up to humble, self-evaluative conversations that lead towards a deeper level of intimacy with each other and with God. And it's complete. If it feels so foreign, it's because it is. It's like a muscle we've never exercised. So if we start exercising this muscle, it's going to hurt for a while, but then we grow in it. It's one of these disciplines that we grow in, and it's a real, real challenge. But Jesus is presenting this way, and he tells us in John 10, let me read this from John 10, another part of his teaching in John's gospel. He builds on this idea. He says, Jesus says, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. This idea that as you come through Jesus, you find this opening up, this life, this nourishment, this fullness. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. It may feel like this narrow path, this narrow gate, but as you walk through, there's true life. Really, what you're ultimately looking for is only found through Jesus. You can't pick both paths, right? You can't balance this or that. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's not the way it works. C.S. Lewis in his book, Mere Christianity, I love how he says this. He says, Christ says, give me all. I don't want so much of your time and so much of your money and so much of your work. I want you. Hand over the whole natural self, all the desires which you think innocent, as well as the ones you think wicked. The whole outfit. I want all of you. I will give you a new self instead. In fact, I will give you myself. My own will shall become yours. And that's what it is about following the way of Jesus and picking the path of Jesus, is that the ethic and the will and the heartbeat of Jesus finds its way into our own life and it begins to transform and change us and we experience life in a whole new way. But we do know, as they did then, as we do now, that choosing the narrow way of Jesus, there's a cost to it. At the very least, at least in our culture, at the very least, maybe people make fun of you, think it's ridiculous, think you're missing out on stuff. Why would you limit what are you doing? But it could be way more intense than that. Maybe you lose friendships. Maybe you lose business deals. Maybe you lose job opportunities. Other parts of the world, maybe you lose your life. So there's a definite cost. It just looks different for each of us in different ways on what that really could look like. But following Jesus is about swimming against the current of our culture. It was then, it still is today. It's a choice you have to make. It's not this willy-nilly, I'll just follow Jesus, but then I'm going to jump back into that when it gets easier or gets difficult because, man, it's that easier. It's easier for a reason. It's because all the culture is on that path. So 3 questions I'd love to just get you thinking about. We'll post them this week for you to maybe have a conversation around your dinner table or with friends over coffee in your small group this week. But 3 questions maybe for you to consider. What does the narrow gate look like for you in your everyday life? Are there choices Jesus is inviting you to make that feel costly? So what does that look like relationally or in your workplace or in your neighborhood? I don't know. But what could that look like if you're going to keep yourself along the way of Jesus? Could that be costly for you? Are you aware of that? I had a really good friend who was really super successful in business, and he would always say, the hardest thing for me about following Jesus is when I'm on the road for work, in a whole bunch of different ways. When no one's watching, when I'm by myself, when I'm making lots of money. The narrow road is about focusing your decisions and your choices in a way that always bring honor to God, even when no one's looking. So what does the narrow gate look like for you, perhaps? Number 2, what are the wide gate temptations that keep calling you? Right? What are those things that just like, oh, it would just be easier if, or I just want to flirt with that, I just want to do that, I just want to experience that. It's too difficult to follow Jesus. I'm giving up too much. Are you? How might you resist them? And number 3, if you truly believe that the narrow road leads to life, if you really believe that Jesus says, I've come to give you life to the full, what is one concrete step you can take this week to live more fully as a follower of Jesus? What is one thing that you can do? Perhaps it's, I'm just not going to judge people in the way I'm prone to doing. I'm going to take a look at my own 2x4. I'm going to approach conversations with more humility and mercy and grace. I'm going to assume the best when I start a conversation rather than just believing the worst of someone when I start out. I invite you to just consider that. What does that look like? It's a narrow road for a reason. There's a cost for a reason. Jesus is really clear about the cost of discipleship, that there is a price to be paid in it. But ultimately, he's encouraging that this leads to the fullness of life that we all ultimately desire. It's who God created us to be. It just feels weird and hard to pull ourselves from kind of the tentacles of the culture. I'm not saying everything's wrong around us, but the way of Jesus is different from the way of our world and our culture. It was then, it still is today. Can I invite you to stand? I'm going to close in prayer, and then we're going to sing together as a wrap up. So God, thanks for being here. Thank you that every time we open Scripture and read, we know that you are here by your Holy Spirit. And Jesus, thanks for presenting this way of being, this ethic of the kingdom that is so challenging. Each week, different angles, different themes, different topics. And so even in this moment, God, we admit to you that our tendency, our temptation is to sit in this place of judgment often with others, assuming that we know better than they do and we don't have as many issues as others. But God, help us to have honest self-reflection. God, reveal the things that we need to continue to work on and ask for forgiveness and feel places we need transformation. Help us also know what it means to have honest, real discipleship conversations with each other that don't feel critical or judgmental, but they feel holy. God, we come before you, we ask, we seek, we knock, we want to be in line with your will. So thank you that you are God who listens to our prayers. God, the narrow road is costly. Give us courage to walk that path. Help us experience life in you. Help us in those areas of testing and temptation where the wide path that is presented by our world just feels better. Help shift our perspective and our understanding. Keep changing us. Holy Spirit, move and shape us as a community. Thanks that we're on this adventure together. This is a challenging but wonderful thing for us to consider this way of Jesus and to keep talking about what it means to let it transform and change us from the inside out. God, lead us. Amen.